To Spirit Live broadcast. I'm still talking about the Middle East conflicts, the world in conflict, as it were, because everything that happens in the Middle East affects the whole world. The conflict has been raging now for close to, I get into 2 weeks. There has been immense loss of life, and it's not really been really wonderful. The tragedy on both sides have been tremendous. Israel, on one hand, has a right to defend its populations, while the Palestinians, or rather the Hamas, because I wouldn't say that what Hamas is doing is what the whole Palestinian people desire, while Hamas is intent on exacting revenge or grievances against the Jewish state of Israel. This is a battle and a conflict that have lingered on for a while. If you had looked at some of our earlier videos, you would see how we traced the beginning of all this whole conflict. But as I was reading the Bible this morning, when you go back, you can look at your scriptures, the book of 2 Samuel chapter 10, from verse 1 to the end of it. The conflict that we have in the Middle East now mirrors this kind of thing. And what happened there was that there was a time when the king of the children of Ammon died, and David had some relationship with him, and he sent envoys to go to his son and say, hey, I commiserate with you at the death of your father. But there were some advisors who told the son of the king of the children of Ammon that David did not come to honor your father. He has sent his servants to come and search out your city. That's in verse 3 of 2 Samuel chapter 10. And to spy it out so that he will overthrow it. And this young son who just ascended to the throne believed it. And so it was a case of wrong advice or misinterpretation of actions. And he made those people an object of fun. He cut off their beards, cut off their clothes, and the people came back ashamed. And because of that, there was a war. Now, when you look at the conflict going on now, every side has its own part of the story. When you ask the Palestinians, they say that, well, Israel is the aggressor. They have come to take our land. And Israel says, this is our land. This has always been our land. We are coming back to our land. And if you watch the last broadcast I made, talking about what happened in 1948, when the British mandate was ended, and Britain asked to have a declaration of two states. They wanted to declare the state of Israel and also give part of the land to the Palestinians who were in the land. The Israelis jumped at the offer, but the Palestinians say no. So it was not really a matter of two-state solution. It was a matter of there should never be an existence of the nation of Israel. That's the thing. Because when you ask the Hamas people that keep firing the rockets, they tell you that they would not, and they don't even recognize the state of Israel. I know that's not the general view of all the whole Palestinians, but these highliners who seem to be calling the shots, this is their view. Because if it was about a two-state solution, it would have been achieved since 1948. When you look at the issues on ground, that's what happened. Because immediately after the state of Israel was declared, or they declared the state of Israel, the whole Arabs, nations around them, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, I think Lebanon, they all came together and just waged a war on this tiny nation, which was just coming to bear. They had not even settled down as a nation. But you know, the miracle is that this just newly formed nation defeated all of them, and stayed as a nation. And again, subsequently, this same kind of war came up again, and not just defeating them, they expanded their territory and even went into Eastern Jerusalem, because before now, Eastern Jerusalem was not under the control of the Israeli nation. Now tell me if that's not a miracle. Because each time they come against them, they keep increasing in their landmass. They took some part of Egypt, took some part of Lebanon. They established a peace treaty with Egypt. That was why they gave back the Sinai to Egypt. But these other people, they are not giving it back because it's a security risk for Israel. The part of Israel which Syria is claiming to be theirs, which is the Golan Heights. It's like a hilltop area, and it gives you a very huge advantage over the low-lying areas of Israel. And if Israel gives back the Golan Heights to Syria, you can imagine what will happen if Syrians put tanks from that area and begin to fire Israel. So you see that this conflict is a complicated thing, and but when you ask the ordinary Palestinians and the ordinary Jews, they want to live in peace together. So it's a matter of influencing factors that are fueling this conflict. Everybody has his own narrative. Now, it is so painful that we have civilian casualties, especially on the Palestinian side, but you also have casualties on the Israeli side. Why the casualties on the Israeli side is less is because Israel is more sophisticated and far advanced and is able to stop the rocket barrage that is being sent, especially from Gaza. Can you imagine more than 1,500 rockets have been sent since this conflict began? But they have the Iron Dome. It reminds me of when the children of Israel left Egypt and God told them to take the blood of the sacrifice, the lamb that was to sacrifice in the night, and put it on their doorpost so that when the angel of death comes, it will pass over them. That's what the Iron Dome is looking like. It's like a sophisticated military shield that envelops Israel. If not, Israel will have been annihilated by the level of missiles that have been fired so far on the Palestinians. So this mirrors the situation we find in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 10. David sent these men to go and commiserate, but the younger advisors gave them the wrong interpretation of it and told this new king to do the wrong thing, and this fuels the conflict. So it's always something that comes up and fuels the conflict. Now, this current conflict was fueled by the fact that just about they were around this breaking of this Muslim fast, that some of Palestinians barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa mosque and refused to have anybody have access into the mosque or the surrounding compound area. Now, the Israeli police has a right to keep law and order. And when they went in to try to restore law and order, they started throwing stones at them. It just takes a little thing to light up a conflict. And from there, Hamas said, well, why would you go into a place that you are having security over? I mean, how absurd can that sound? But they still went ahead, and this was why Hamas started raining rockets indiscriminately, and this is the cause of this. And you see, when you look at that 2 Samuel chapter 10 down, you see that Israel had to go to war against the Syrians and the children of Ammon, and of course they defeated them. So you see that once we get into conflicts that are not resolved, there is always loss of life. So we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and also we need to be careful the kind of advice we get from people. It could be the wrong advice. Be careful the kind of associations you're going to. Be careful the kind of information you get from people. And it's very important that we also pray for Israel, pray for the Palestinians. Let's pray that the conflict will stop, there will be a ceasefire, so that there will be no more loss of life. God bless.